When an animal is discovered by science, it becomes real. Its history is rewritten. Science always knew about the animal, and the cryptozoologists who had spoken of them before were transformed from absurd eccentrics to true scientists. It can then be all too easy to forget that some of the animals we know of and take for granted once existed only in mythology and the fringes of scientific thought. Once cryptids, they were considered to be little more than hoaxes, pseudoscientific, and entirely unlikely of actually existing. A watery kingdom of wondrous creatures, for centuries the oceans were considered to be the realm of monsters. Sea serpents and dragons, the fearsome kraken, the multi-headed hydra, and all manner of other terrible marine beasts were whispered to lurk in the earth's waters. Teeth and claws, suckers and tentacles are scary enough, but what of beauty? According to centuries-old mythology, in the wrong hands beauty could be transformed into a weapon of hideous effectiveness. Possessing the upper body of a woman and the lower body of a fish, mermaids appear in the folklore of many cultures worldwide. Perhaps the most famous of all mythological sea creatures, they are traditionally depicted as beautiful maidens with long flowing hair and melodic voices. A magical creature indeed. Yet, whilst not inherently malevolent, mermaids are described as having a dark side, with folklore often associating them with luring young men to their demise. In the folklore of the British Isles, mermaids are said to presage disaster. Appearing before storms, such stories relate how mermaids not only herald misfortune, but actively cause it to happen, luring, drowning, and devouring human victims. In early Irish tradition, they were considered to have once been pagan women, transformed into an aquatic form by Saint Patrick. Soulless creatures, mermaids were believed to prey on humans for the purpose of gathering the souls of the drowned in cages. Marriage was another method through which a mermaid could obtain a human soul. Their enchanting appearance, in combination with an irresistibly sweet singing voice, drew human men to them. In 15th century Holland, a mermaid was said to have been found floundering in the shallow waters after a storm. Beguiled, humans dressed and fed the creature, allowing her to live with them. In Asia, there are similar stories of alluring half-fish, half-women creatures being discovered and taken into human homes. One 18th century Chinese text contains an account of a man marrying a mermaid after capturing her on the shore of Hong Kong's Lantau Island. Undoubtedly, belief in mermaids was widespread and substantial. So, are mermaids real? After all, it certainly seems as though people have been encountering some sort of enchanting aquatic creature for centuries. On the 8th of January 1493, the explorer Christopher Columbus was sailing near the Dominican Republic. Like many sailors before him, he claimed to have encountered mermaids. However, far from being beguiled by their beauty, he was rather surprised. The three creatures were not half as beautiful as they are painted. The reason for this is that they were probably not fair-faced mermaids at all, but rather manatees. Far from being make-believe, sailors' sightings of mermaids are most likely to have been encounters with real creatures. Slow-moving aquatic mammals with human-like eyes, bulbous faces, and paddle-like tails, manatees are found in various locations across the globe. Also known as sea cows, their silhouettes in the water can be said to be reminiscent of what we might consider a mermaid. Not only that, manatees' movements, the performance of tail stands, and how they rise up out of the sea are similar to classic mythical mermaid stances. It is no coincidence then that the manatee belonged to the biological order Sirenia, a clear reference to the siren, another enchanting mythological creature believed to lure sailors to their death. The Steller's sea cow, a now extinct Sirenia, was first described by a zoologist in 1741, meaning for much of human history the existence of these mermaid-like creatures was unrecognized by science. Arguably, the case of the okapi is a prime example of modern scientific arrogance. For centuries, visitors to Europe from the African continent spoke of a bizarre beast, a quaint chimera. It was said to be blue-tongued and long-necked like a giraffe, but with the body of a donkey and the striped markings of a zebra. Natives of the Congo called it the ati, an elusive rainforest-dwelling creature who ran away at the smallest sound. Western scholars called it the African unicorn, a creature as ludicrous and unlikely as its namesake. The animal, however, had been spoken of for centuries, even appearing as early as the 5th century BC on the facade of the Apadana at Persepolis, depicted as part of a gift-bearing procession of an Ethiopian delegation. For all of this, it wasn't until the late 19th century that the existence of the African unicorn began to be taken seriously. The famous explorer Henry Morton Stanley speculated on the animal's existence in his journals. Later, scraps of patterned skin were brought to Europe for study. Even so, for the most part, the Western scientific community was incredulous. Such a creature could not exist. This was, after all, an age in which the heads and torsos of monkeys were being sewn to the back halves of fish and exhibited as mermaids. Fraudulent, fantastical creatures composed of the parts of more than one animal were common attractions at circuses and shows. What made the African unicorn any different? Eventually, a skull obtained by the British Special Commissioner in Uganda, Sir Harry Johnston, was studied and determined to belong to a hitherto unknown relative of the giraffe. In 1901, a new species, Okapia johnstoni, was formally recognised. The African unicorn, so it turned out, had been real all along. In the decades since its demystification, the okapi has become somewhat of an icon of cryptozoology, and was even used as the symbol of the now defunct International Society of Cryptozoology. No less captivating than when it was first described, with there still being much to learn about its habits and lifestyle, the okapi is a reminder that we do not yet know everything there is to know about the planet we call home. The gorilla is no doubt an iconic animal. Yet, for centuries, similar to the okapi, it was little more than the subject of fantastical tales from travellers and explorers. One of the earliest accounts of the gorilla came from the Carthaginian explorer Hanno the Navigator, who conducted a large-scale expedition along the western coast of Africa around the 5th century BC. His expedition would be one of the most celebrated voyages of antiquity. During his journey, he described encountering a tribe of hairy and savage people who his interpreters called gorillae. After pursuing them, they all escaped to the top of precipices, which they mounted with ease and threw down stones. The explorers managed to capture 3 of the females, but after what was described as violent struggles, slaughtered them. Their skins were taken back to Carthage and put on display for centuries. When the Romans destroyed the city, the skins were lost. The gorilla afterward descended into obscura. In 1625, the English seaman Andrew Battle was captured by the Portuguese in Africa and there overheard rumours of an enormous hairy ape-man. It was described as a monster, for this creature's strength was so colossal that no one could capture it. This account, although intriguing, did not attract serious attention in its time, and was most likely regarded in a similar manner as stories of Yeti and Bigfoot are today. Battle's account is now considered to be another early reference to the gorilla. It wasn't until the middle of the 19th century that descriptions of the gorilla resurfaced. Thomas S. Savage, an American missionary in Africa, brought gorilla bones with him on his return home. This sparked a flurry of scientific inquiry into the existence of a hitherto unknown creature, with much speculation as to its existence. Very little was known about the beast, with it being unbelievable that they could exist in the mountains. Many believed they were savage and ferocious creatures that lived in the lowlands, with incorrect presumptions about their nature later inspiring the fictional King Kong. When the explorer Paul de Chaillu was able to collect some deceased specimens in lowland areas, their existence there seemed all the more certain. In reality, gorillas were often confused with chimps and other primates. Scientific understanding remained confused until 1902. The German explorer Captain Robert von Behring certified the mountain gorilla's existence with a bullet. He described the creature he had shot as a big human-like male monkey of 1.5 meters in height and a weight of more than 200 pounds. His chest had no hair and his hands and feet were of enormous size. Brought to the forefront of science, the gorilla was no longer a monster. That a species of ape could remain hidden to Western science for so long has led many to wonder if there are other ape men waiting to be discovered. Throughout history, dragons have existed as a staple of folklore. The Anglo-Saxon poem Beowulf describes them as large, ferocious lizards with a venomous bite. In Norse mythology, the dragon Fafnir is described as a powerful, wingless and serpentine creature. The Chinese legend of the dragon also describes it as a mystical, wingless beast. In Indonesia, there existed another type of dragon legend, known as the Dragon Princess of Komodo. According to the story, during the earliest times in history, there was a village chief and his wife living on the island of Komodo. There, the woman gave birth to a young boy and his strange-looking twin sister. The sister, it is said, had speckled, scaly skin, hooded black eyes, and a tail. The parents loved both their children, but as they grew up, they walked very different paths, until it could be hidden no longer that their daughter was in fact a dragon. After a while, the young dragon moved out of the village and lived in the savannah surrounding it. Years later, her brother, now a man, encountered her during a hunt. He was poised to attack the great reptile that stood before him when, all of a sudden, an apparition of their mother appeared and admonished him, saying, "Would you kill your own sister?" The man put down his spear, and the apparition said, "I bore you together, consider her your equal." Because of this legend, until the 1980s, the villagers on the island considered the dragons that lived amongst them as their equals, and would often feed them goats and deer. Yet, for all of this normality, it would not be until the early 20th century that Europeans began to hear of these great dragons of Indonesia. Peter Owens, a scientist and director of the Java Zoological Museum and Botanical Gardens, wrote the first formal description of the Komodo dragon in 1912. He described the creature as being of exceptional dimensions that can move with great rapidity. Indeed, Komodo dragons are greatly feared, for their strength is arguably just as great as their legendary forebears are said to have been. Growing up to 3 meters long, their favoured method of attack is by ambushing their victim with a large single bite. They have been known to take down prey that is even larger than they are. These fearsome reptiles have even been known to attack and kill humans. That such a large and reptilian creature could have existed unknown to much of the world until relatively recently is phenomenal. That the Komodo dragon bears such a resemblance to the dragons of legend makes one wonder, if these creatures exist, what manner of other dragons walked the earth before them? According to the Vietnamese legend, the 15th century emperor and founder of the Lê dynasty, Lê Loi, possessed a mythical sword. With it, he was able to grow very tall. It also gave him the strength of 1,000 men and, most importantly, the power to liberate Vietnam from Chinese occupation. As the story goes, the sword was discovered by a fisherman. Thinking he had caught a large fish in his net, he was disappointed to pull a piece of metal from the water. When he took the metal home, he realized it was the blade of a sword. Not knowing what to do with it, he kept it in his house and forgot about it. Some years later, the fisherman joined the rebel army of Lê Loi. One day, Lê Loi visited his house and was surprised to find the sword glowing and appealing to him from across the room. The sword, so it turned out, was a gift from heaven, meant to be used by Lê Loi in order to liberate Vietnam. The fisherman gave his commander the sword, and with it Lei Loi succeeded in freeing his country from Chinese rule. A year after ascending to the throne, Lei Loi was cruising the Green Water Lake directly in front of his palace. When he came to the middle of the lake, a giant turtle with a golden shell emerged from the water. Upon appearing, the sword on the emperor's belt began to move on its own. It was then that the golden turtle spoke to Lei Loi. In a human voice, the turtle told the emperor that he was a god, and the magic sword was not his to keep. It had instead been lent to him so that he could perform his duty and enact the will of heaven. Understanding what he must do, Lei Loi is said to have thrown the sword out of the boat. The god turtle snatched it from the air and descended back into the water, the weapon beneath its teeth. After this, the emperor renamed the lake Hoan Kiem Lake, meaning the Lake of the Returned Sword. For centuries, both the magical sword and the golden turtle have been important elements of Vietnamese folklore. For a long time afterwards, the turtles that lived in Hoan Kiem Lake were revered. Some regarded them as a distinct species, with others arguing that they merely belonged to another species of turtle. Regardless, not everyone cared for the reptiles that lived in the lake. Local fishermen considered them to be pests and hunted them, often with explosives. On the 2nd of June 1967, what was considered to be the last of the Hoan Kiem turtles was bludgeoned to death by a fisherman with a crowbar. Ironically, the last descendant of the turtle god who had presented the magical sword to a fisherman was killed by someone of the same occupation. After that, Hoan Kiem turtles were considered extinct. Returning to the legend from which they had been born, they were classified as cryptozoological by the scientists who disputed the infrequent sightings that were reported in the decades afterwards. Then, on the 24th of March 1998, the zoological world was shaken. An amateur cameraman caught one of the creatures on video, conclusively proving the sacred giant turtle still lived in the lake. In the year 2000, the species was given a formal scientific name. For a time, the turtle, nicknamed great-grandfather turtle by local people, lived on, even surviving the peak of the lake's pollution in 2011, when he was seen frequently surfacing, ailing and struggling for oxygen. Then, finally, in January 2016, the legendary turtle was found dead. He was thought to have been between 80 and 100 years old, and the last of his kind. For the second time in history, the Hoan Kiem turtle went extinct. A strange story, a legendary cryptid rediscovered, only to be pushed back into the pages of mythology. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, ensuring you have clicked the bell icon to enable all notifications for more content. Equally, you can head over to my website, paranormalscholar.com, and sign up to my newsletter to make sure you never miss an upload. And if you cannot wait until my next video, why not watch the one suggested on screen now? Until next time,